The Galactic Council had issued multiple briefings about humans before assigning Commander Zixither to a joint operation with them. The reports described humans as volatile, overly emotional, and disturbingly enthusiastic about conflict, often approaching war with the mindset of a competitive game. Still, none of those warnings came close to preparing Zixither for what he experienced at the shared military outpost orbiting Kepler. Zixither was no inexperienced officer. He was a highly decorated Krillian commander with 17 years of frontline service, having fought across 12 different star systems. His hardened exoskeleton carried the scars of plasma scorch marks and kinetic weapon impacts. He had faced Vorith raiders and Berserker clans without hesitation or fear. And yet, here he stood, utterly unprepared, inside the human mess hall. The source of his confusion wasn't a battlefield dispute or tactical disagreement. It was an argument. A loud, passionate argument about something called barbecue. Texas style is clearly superior, insisted Lieutenant Parker, his eyes burning with the same intensity Zixither had only ever seen during combat briefings. Parker's muscular arms seemed excessive for someone whose primary duty involved drone coordination, but humans often appeared physically overbuilt for their roles. Across from him stood Nancy, the base's logistics officer, arms folded in defiance. Her red hair was tied back in a regulation bun, though several loose strands escaped, giving her a slightly disorderly look, something unthinkable in Krillian military culture. Kansas City barbecue deserves respect, she shot back. Sweet, smoky, perfectly balanced. That's just sugar pretending to be food, Parker argued. Zixither's translator implant struggled to interpret the discussion. Were they debating incendiary compounds? Flavor profiles? His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, an involuntary Krillian response signaling confusion. Nancy noticed him observing the exchange. Commander Zixither, have you eaten yet? She asked casually. He gestured toward the compact nutrient pack clipped to his armor. I have consumed sufficient sustenance. Parker grimaced, his expression translating to a mix of horror and pity. You've been living on ration paste for weeks. That stuff may be complete, but so is dog food. Technically accurate, Nancy muttered. They exchanged a glance, what humans called a shared understanding. Zixither recognized the pattern immediately, and it unsettled him. Humans agreeing on something rarely led to predictable outcomes. 30 minutes later, Zixither found himself seated at a metal table while Parker operated a device known as a grill and Nancy prepared several side dishes. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents. His sensory slits, designed to detect enemy chemical traces at microscopic levels, were overwhelmed by a chaotic flood of aromas that made it difficult to think clearly. This is unnecessary, Zixither objected weakly. I have operational responsibilities. Your responsibility right now is eating real food, Nancy replied, placing a plate in front of him. Consider this cultural exchange. Alliance building, officially. The plate contained substances his database identified as coleslaw and baked beans. Parker approached with another platter, causing Zixither's threat assessment systems to activate instantly. The centerpiece was meat, processed animal protein, that had been intentionally charred. Humans had burned it on purpose and appeared proud of the result. All right, Commander, Parker said enthusiastically. This is brisket. Cooked low and slow for 14 hours over mesquite wood. Best thing I've ever made. Zixither examined it cautiously. His species had abandoned solid food consumption millennia ago, deeming it inefficient and archaic. The idea that humans still engaged in ritualized consumption of animal flesh struck him as primitive. Barbaric. Completely unnecessary. And yet, it smelled extraordinary. How do I proceed? Zixither asked, gesturing uncertainly. Nancy handed him a knife and fork. Just cut a small piece. Ease into it. His manipulators weren't designed for human utensils, but with effort, he separated a portion of the meat. It was dark and crisp on the outside, what Parker called the bark, and pink within. He hesitated before guiding it toward his intake port. Then he consumed it. The reaction was immediate and extreme. Every sensory receptor in Zixither's body activated at once. His exoskeleton vibrated at a resonant frequency. Chromatophores meant for camouflage began flashing uncontrollably, cycling through vivid colors. His secondary hearts accelerated to emergency combat levels. "Oh no," Parker said, stepping forward. "He's reacting." "Wait," Nancy said, gripping his arm. "Look at his neural crest." The bioluminescent ridge along Zixither's spine pulsed in complex patterns the translator identified as overwhelming pleasure. The Krillian commander froze, locked in what appeared to be total system shock. 17 seconds later, his awareness stabilized. He stared at the remaining brisket with something resembling reverence. "What," he asked, voice crackling with static, "was that?" "That," Parker said proudly, "is what we call excellent barbecue." Zixither reached for another piece, his appendages trembling. "This is a weapon," he declared. "You are attempting to incapacitate me." Nancy laughed. "If that was the goal, we'd have used Parker's ghost pepper sauce. This is mild by comparison. There is something stronger than this?" Zixither asked, his tone hovering between fear and fascination. Before they could answer, he consumed another bite. The sensory overload returned, though this time his systems adapted more quickly. Salt, smoke, rendered fat, and spices interacted with his neural chemistry in ways no evolutionary model had predicted. "The Galactic Council must be informed," Zixither said once he could speak clearly. "This alters strategic understanding." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" Zixither gestured solemnly at the plate, a Krillian sign of absolute seriousness. "We have long questioned why humans fight with such persistence. Why surrender is so rare. Why morale remains high even in hopeless situations." He took another bite. "If your species experiences daily existence at this intensity, if sustenance alone produces such pleasure, then your behavior makes sense. You are not reckless. You are overwhelmed by life itself." Parker and Nancy exchanged another glance. "He gets it," Parker said. "He really does," Nancy agreed. For the next hour, Zixither methodically sampled everything offered. The beans were sweet and savory. The coleslaw introduced textures his database had no comparison for. Then came cornbread, dense, warm, and impossibly rich, like solidified sunlight. When he finally finished, his body shimmered faintly with lingering pleasure responses. "I must report this," he said quietly. "You going to tell them we poisoned you?" Parker asked. "No," Zixither replied, fixing all four eyes on them. "I will recommend a complete revision of human combat threat assessments." He paused. "Also, I require the recipe. For intelligence purposes." Nancy smiled. "I think this marks the start of a strong friendship, Commander. Can we do this again tomorrow?" Zixither asked, all remaining dignity gone. Parker laughed and clapped a heavy hand against the Krillian's armored shoulder. "Tomorrow's taco night. Street style." Zixither's chromatophores flickered, anticipation, fear, or perhaps both. The galaxy, he knew, would never be the same.